the best and most independent source of information on the global internet. And today, the intensity of armed clashes between Israeli troops and Palestinian fighters has decreased. Palestinian militant groups seek to threaten southern parts of Israel. Iran warns Israel. This and more in today's report from Israel. I invite you to watch. On October 15th, various Palestinian combat groups launched further attacks on Israeli territory, mainly in its southern part. The Al-Qassam Brigades, which is the military arm of Hamas, claimed responsibility for 2 attacks using unmanned aerial vehicles and 12 strikes using mortars and rockets. In turn, Saraya al-Quds, the militant group of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, claimed responsibility for another 12 attacks of the same type. Additionally, a militia belonging to the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine reported carrying out 2 mortar strikes. CTP-ISW analyses also indicate reports of 5 failed rocket and mortar attacks. All of this confirms CTP-ISW's earlier observations that Hamas has likely reduced the intensity of its offensive operations in an effort to conserve ammunition in the face of the possibility of a longer conflict. It is worth adding that CTP-ISW did not record information about the penetration of militants into the territory of Israel or about armed clashes using firearms on that day in the south of the country. The intensity of armed clashes between Israeli troops and Palestinian fighters decreased, peaking on October 13. CTP-ISW analyses show that 8 such incidents were recorded on October 15th, while there were 13 on October 14th, which is a noticeable decrease compared to the 32 incidents on October 13th. Israeli forces carry out arrest operations in the West Bank, which likely contributes to the decline in the intensity of the conflict. Nevertheless, Hamas continues to seek to escalate the situation in the region. On October 15th, Fatah, the main political party of Palestinians in the West Bank, organized a march in Ramallah to protest against the actions of the Israel Defense Forces in the Gaza Strip. CTP-ISW analyses indicate that since October 7th, there have been 5 clashes and 4 protest marches in Ramallah. On October 15th, the LH organization intensified its operations against Israeli forces along the Israel-Lebanon border. The variety of attacks and the forces involved demonstrate increased involvement in the conflict. According to an Israel Defense Forces (IDF) spokesman, Iran ordered the LH to escalate actions against Israel in order to increase pressure on Israeli forces as they prepare for operations in the Gaza Strip. LH engaged in confrontations with Israeli troops in 5 border towns and military points. The organization also carried out at least 5 anti-tank missile attacks on Israeli targets, claiming responsibility for them for the 3rd time in a row. A slight increase in the number of incidents of this type can be observed, and their scope has expanded to the western sectors of the Israeli-Lebanese border. Since the beginning of the conflict on October 7th, most of the LH attacks have been concentrated around Shabaa farms. The Al-Qassam Brigades, the militant wing of Hamas, reported that they fired 20 rockets into northern Israel on October 15th. Given LH's control over southern Lebanon and cooperation with other Iranian-backed groups, it is likely that these actions were coordinated and approved by LH. On the same day, the Al-Qassam Brigades announced that their fighters had penetrated the northern areas of Israel and clashes had occurred with Israeli forces. The United States is stepping up its military presence in the Middle East in response to the growing conflict between Israel and the Palestinian militant organization Hamas and to deter potential Iranian involvement. Amid growing concerns about the war expanding on a larger scale, America's newest and largest aircraft carrier has been deployed to the eastern Mediterranean. Another unit of this class is expected to join it in the coming 10 days. Although the White House says it has no plans to use these units, they will be ready to provide air support if necessary. The situation is dynamic. Israel responds to attacks by Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, which has been subject to intense bombing in recent days. Israeli forces also encountered Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, the most serious clash since the 2006 war. In response to these events, U.S. officials are emphasizing the country's determination to protect its interests and allies in the region. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin assured that he had not noticed any signs of Hezbollah activation along the Lebanese border. While the United States does not plan to engage directly, the deployment of additional forces to the region is intended to serve as a deterrent and give President Joe Biden options for action in the future. Senator Lindsey Graham suggests that if escalation occurs, Iran should face consequences, pointing to potential attacks on Iran's oil industry. In summary, the United States is increasing its military presence in the Middle East in the face of rising tensions and potential escalation of the conflict. While direct involvement is currently unplanned, the U.S. stands ready to act to defend its interests and those of allies in the region. The Israel Defense Forces conducted an air operation against Aleppo Airport on October 14th. This was their second attack on this facility since the conflict began on October 7th. Earlier, on October 12th, the IDF also attacked the Damascus airport. A high-ranking representative of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized that such actions result from Israel's efforts to prevent Iran from supplying weapons to Syria and to block attempts to open a new war front against Israel. It is known that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been using passenger planes linked to the Iranian government to transport military equipment to Syria for many years during the internal conflict there. After the IDF attack on Aleppo, unknown perpetrators fired rockets from Syrian territory towards the Golan Heights, which can be interpreted as a symbolic act of retaliation. Israeli missile defenses successfully intercepted these missiles, and in response, the IDF responded with artillery fire into Syria. Iran has warned Israel against continuing aggression against the Palestinians, and its foreign minister suggested the readiness of other actors in the region to intervene, according to Fars news agency. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian stressed that regional parties could become involved if Israel continues its actions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, declared his intention to annihilate Hamas, while the Israeli armed forces were preparing to intervene in the Gaza Strip in response to Hamas attacks. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, denied Tehran's involvement in Hamas attacks on Israeli territory, but expressed satisfaction with the military and intelligence problems Israel faces. Israel has long pointed to Iran as a source of support for Hamas by supplying weapons. Iran responds that its support for Hamas is moral and financial. Support for the Palestinians has been a key element of Iran's foreign policy since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Amir Abdollahian also warned that Israeli attacks could lead to the opening of new resistance fronts in the region, and that responsibility for a possible escalation of the conflict rests with the United States and Israel. During the meeting in Qatar with the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, they discussed Hamas's activities in Israel and expressed their willingness to continue cooperation. The president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, in a conversation with the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, appealed for France to contribute to ending the repression against the Palestinians. Confusion has erupted among global financial leaders as a result of the recent Hamas attack on Israel, which has highlighted existing geopolitical divisions. These divisions have created difficulties for institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank as they formulate strategies to mitigate the impact of sudden economic crises. The attack that took place on October 7th unexpectedly affected the annual meeting of these institutions in Morocco, forcing a rethinking of previously prepared agendas. Although the IMF director, Kristalina Georgieva, initially did not address the issue of the conflict, she later tried to address the situation, calling it tragic for the people, but without a clear impact on the world economy. In private discussions, participants of the financial meeting focused on the potential effects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, from the migration crisis through the impact on trade to possible tensions in Lebanon and the West Bank. As Rachel Nadelman from the American University's Center for Accountability Research emphasizes, existing financial institutions seem unprepared to deal with such crises. Moreover, even in the official statements of the world's leading economies and the management of the IMF and the World Bank, there was no mention of the conflict. Iran and its axis of resistance allies are signaling the possibility of the Hamas-Israel conflict escalating into a more extensive war on many fronts. The CTP-ISW Center is closely monitoring the situation, trying to assess the likelihood of such a development. According to Axios, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian has hinted that Tehran may intervene if Israel does not stop its operations in the Gaza Strip, especially if the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, begins ground operations. He made this comment during talks with the UN representative for the Middle East peace process, Tor Wennesland, in Beirut on October 14th. CTP-ISW documented this meeting, drawing attention to Abdollahian's appeal to the UN to end the Israeli intervention in Gaza before the situation escalates even further. Recently, Iranian-backed Iraqi fighters have appeared along the Israel-Lebanon border. The Asaib al-Haq group announced on October 8th its involvement in the conflict against Israel. Iraqi fighters supported by Tehran demonstrate their presence in the border area through posts on social media. One of them is the leader of the Iraqi Kataib Sayyid al-Shohada militia, Abu Allah al-Walai. Recently, Iran-backed fighters have also been spotted on Syria's southwestern border, including missile experts and military engineers. Israeli sources report that among them, there are also members of the Afghan Fatimiyun Division and the Pakistani Zainabiyun Division. According to certain reports by an Iranian journalist, General Esmail Ghani of the elite IRGC Quds Corps is coordinating certain activities in Syria. The same journalist emphasized that before arriving in Syria, Ghani met with Iranian-backed fighters in Iraq.